Welcome, brave listeners, to the Next Level podcast, the podcast that'll push your business to the next level. And I'm here today with a friend, Zavosh. I'm here with my co-host, Catarina. Catarina, thank you for being here again.
It is absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.
And Zav, thank you for being here as well. I
Thank you
will
so
introduce you a little bit so everyone can understand a little bit about who is Zavosh. So, an award-winning serial entrepreneur and investor with nearly 2 decades. 2 decades?
Yeah.
How old are you, man?
Believe it or not.
Oh my God. Of experience in technology, investment management, and startup acceleration. Zavosh, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. Thanks for everyone for tuning in to listen to the podcast.
Yeah. So, again, our chat today, it's to understand a little bit of how to start a business, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that we're going to dive in today, but for everyone who's going to listen to this episode, if you really wants to understand how to start and how to thrive a business, which who already has experience doing that, that's your episode. So hit the follow in for the next episodes, and I hope you enjoyed this one. So Zavosh, I really would like to ask a couple of questions, like first to understand a little bit like, who are you, right? And I really want to hear a bit about your story as well, or how do you decide to start being entrepreneur?
Sure. I mean, that's if you want, I can get philosophical in terms of who am I. I think I've learned this in the recent years and through so many years of having to be in different sectors, different industries. My identity has evolved and changed according to each business, each sector. So that's definitely something that I think I would encourage people to explore further. So you don't just have a fixed identity and live with it all your life, because all your growth opportunities lie in having to push yourself and evolve and get uncomfortable with yourself. And so you asked a question in terms of how do you get started? I grew up with a single parent. I didn't really have any access. I didn't know any incubators, accelerators, and I was passionate about entrepreneurship. In fact, when I was really young, this is something I later on realized. I was drawn to the stories of inventors, and those inventors were entrepreneurs. So when I wanted to get started, I was very young. I was working around like 14. I was doing sales, different sales jobs, which actually prepared me for a lot of the other roles in the future. But I wanted to start my first business, and I remember I was 15 and I walked up University Avenue in Toronto to register a business, and they're like, come back next year when you turn 16. So that's when I started my first business, when I was 16. And I wanted to get
so disappointed. Right?
Yeah, I was. But I still remember the feeling when I first registered that business. It was like I already accomplished something. Just the feeling of, having your business, and
Especially
I didn't know anything
at that age.
and I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
But just that feeling, I can recall that moment. And the first sector that I got into was media. I was really passionate about the music business, the business of music industry, and later that kind of opened it up for being in the film industry and media industry at large. So we can get into that if you like. But yeah, I would say just start, know your why, and we can talk about that too. Like, why do you want to have a business? That's where you get all your power from. That's where you find fuel and the energy to get up in the morning and want to pursue a business. So yeah.
Yeah, there's one catchphrase that I love. It's start before you're ready, right, or something like that. I think that's the gear to thrive any entrepreneur, because a lot of people, they think too much, but the action to take the first steps, it never happens. Right?
That's right.
So I love that. I love to hear that. Like, did you take the steps, even had a big no at the first try? But still, you've got it.
You just got to start at some point. I can understand for a lot of people that, you have a career and now you decide, okay, I want to start a business. There's a big fear associated with the unknown that comes with it, and every fear is just, that fear of unknown. So you just have to go with it and get excited. So something that I teach a lot of my clients early on, let me know if it resonates, but when you look at children, they're excited. Physiologically, your body doesn't know the difference between fear and excitement, because when we get older, we tend to lean towards fear, and what it does is really, it's just a positive, negative. It's very binary. Mm-hmm. If you don't know what's going to happen and you just activate excitement, you can go through with it with joy. If you don't know what's going to happen and you activate fear, you feel paralyzed.
I think that ties back to what you started with, which is really know your why. Make that connection between knowing your why, and I would call that curiosity, right? As adults, we can choose to shift from fear into excitement, joy, playfulness, all these other things, right? Can you make that connection between that purpose? What does that look like for people? What are good purposes? What are bad purposes? And obviously none of us can judge if it's a good purpose or bad purpose, but what does a good purpose statement sound like? And how do people tap into curiosity to keep rejuvenating, especially when they start hitting walls?
Wow. Love that question. Okay.
Powerful.
Let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah,
so
lots of things in there.
We're talking about purpose. I think for me, if I was to be very transparent, when I was younger, the energy behind what got me into entrepreneurship was fear of losing my parent and not having anybody else, and not knowing. A lot of the unknown evolved around loss. Mm-hmm. And that got me to operate out of, you can get a lot of energy, you can generate a lot of energy to do a lot of things faster.
Yep.
So I think, and I will get to your question, but sometimes people live many years and they spend many years learning a craft. Sometimes you can increase the rate of growth. And so it doesn't matter how many years if you can go through the wheels faster. So my why...
And if you're a good learner, if you really reflect a lot. Yeah.
100%. So my why early on was just intuitively, I wanted to do something meaningful with my time on this planet. I thought music was powerful because of the influence that it brings with it. And I understood it at a young age. And I was like, that's why I want to get into this field, because it's worth it, despite the challenges. And when I was in the industry, then I actually saw firsthand how many people don't realize their power and they don't know how they're using their influence.
Magic words. Can you repeat that? Sorry, say that again, because that's my whole, yeah.
So, I mean, I've worked with people who didn't realize their position and what power they're holding. Yeah. And that's not a good situation or position to be in if you don't play your cards.
So many people are in that place.
Absolutely. And then I learned it's not just the music industry. It's actually across many different sectors. So it is an individual approach to how you position your why or figure out your purpose. But fast forward like another 2 decades, and it was before the pandemic. I remember I sat down and I was like, let me just look back. Let me spend some time figuring out my why. And I came up with a statement. I put it on my LinkedIn at the time let me first backtrack and explain my thought process, because this will help a lot of the people listening in. I wanted to find a why that would make all the suffering, adversity, all the challenges that I faced in life worthwhile.
Nice.
So with that question, when I thought about a number, like how much money would make it all feel okay? Put billions, put whatever number you like. This is a good exercise. Anybody listening can do it on their own and see if it will fulfill that deep urge or gap or whatever it is. For me, the number didn't. So I was like, this is really interesting.
It's not about the number.
It wasn't about the number for me. And sometimes it is about the number. So there's no good and bad in that. But I thought about it more, and the statement that I came up with was, if I help inspire and empower 1 million entrepreneurs, that brought a certain level of excitement internally. And I was like, okay, like I can do that. It's achievable over a decade, not immediately. And I just put that in the universe. And within, I think, a couple of days, I get a call from one of my other friends who's a serial entrepreneur, very, very good at what he does. And he called me and he's like, hey, can I take half off your plate? Can we do that? And I was like, wow, imagine that, how fast the universe actually brings the support if you can single out your goal, your why.
And it's meaningful.
So
Yeah.
I don't,
Can I just interrupt you for a second,
Sure.
and then we'll come back? So don't lose your train of thought.
no problem.
The idea of a money, like having a number in your mind in terms of what you're aiming for, we need metrics. Absolutely. I'm not against money. Make as much money as you want. But there's so much research. And what's interesting is I worked in the financial industry internationally and elsewhere for most of my life. And then I worked 10, 15 years with high-tech investors, investors, mostly angels, a few VCs. And the ones who really seem to have the most staying power were the ones that really emphasized value. Know what value you bring, know what value you create, focus on the value that you can create for other people who will pay you for it, and then the number will come. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And often the number will be bigger. And when I was doing PhD level research, the research is absolutely profound in multiple fields of research that says the more that you focus on money, the more that you focus on sort of the treats that we get, not to say that money is just a treat, but just to sort of, the external things that we don't actually control, we actually end up losing a lot more, and we are much less effective than if we focus on what can we do, what's the value that we create, how do we develop mastery of the area that we want. So it's a really powerful thing, what you said.
Thank you. We can get into it.
I love that there's a catchphrase say, create the value and the money will follow. Sorry,
Yeah,
and
that's
the
okay.
money will follow you, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I believe. A lot of people are aiming. I won't say like the wrong thing, but sometimes if you're deeply aiming something, you lost the landscape and the broad vision.
I
Right?
do want to clarify something because there are people listening, and what I shared, this was based on the question of purpose.
Yes.
So we're talking very macro.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now to make it attainable
And very internal as
and
well.
very internal. So, but now to bring it back to make it achievable for people, you have to have numbers.
Yes.
That's where you set goals.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to
Well, they're
clarify
metrics. They're metrics to figure out if you're going in the right direction.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's absolutely not ignore the money. Like, no. We're
Yeah.
talking business here. We're talking life.
100%.
Yeah. But it's also, we have to have the things that are harder to quantify as well. So
Absolutely. And I do want to talk more about that too, because if you're in business, so I come from working with impact investors, working across the impact
Nice.
sector as well as, number of different sectors. But at the end of the day, as an entrepreneur, any type of business is a business, and you have to have that revenue lens. If you just entirely focus on your, why, and I've seen this happen with a lot of artists, with a lot of people that are on the other side of their brain to make the transition.
Oh, the money will come. The magical, mystical thinking of the money will come.
Exactly. And so you need a good balance. I think.
Absolutely. That's the key. Yeah.
And that leads like this next questions that I really would like to ask, because I think it's so on a topic that we are discussing. It's how entrepreneur can build resilience and adaptability to succeed. And we were discussing about purpose and why. Curiosity. And in my personal opinion, that helps into the resilience part. Like to become strong in something, if you're lost, sometimes it's hard to keep the resilience, right?
Absolutely.
So I really would to have your opinion about that.
Sure. Thanks, Bruno. I love that question. I'm going to slow down for anybody listening to really pay attention to this next phrase I'm about to share, which is entrepreneurship is a sport. And I want everybody to think about that. Entrepreneurship is a sport, because when you look at it from the lens of an athlete, if I like playing basketball, right? And I get into a league, and this is where you might be a great basketball player, but once you enter a league, there are rules that come with that, and you have to level up to play at that level. And then again, there's other levels. If you want to get to semifinals, if you want to get to finals, if you want to get to the Olympics, you got to constantly get better at the sport that you play. It's the same sport of, you play
I
with the
cannot
ball.
lose this opportunity. There's always a next level.
There's always a next level. Thank you. Great plug there. So with that in mind, let's say I injure myself playing the sport I love. Is that a failure? Do I stop playing? If I'm really about the sport, if I really love the sport, I'm going to work on myself, get better, get back in the game. So nobody can tell me to stop playing.
Or find a different way to participate.
Absolutely. And figure out your strength. Maybe you're better if you're playing, soccer reference, you might be a better midfield. You might be, you realize you have this special ability to be a better goalie. So you have to play to learn what you're good at, what you're not good at, understand teamwork, right? Which is what entrepreneurship is about. So that really, yeah, that's something I get excited about sharing, because when you look at the landscape of US Canada, I love the entrepreneurship sport of the American model, because the Americans are competitive. They're competitive in sport, they're competitive in business, and they push each other. They're not afraid to aiming for the number one spot. They want to win. They want to win. And it's celebrated across the country, and they all know that. It's part of their identity, back to the identity. In Canada, unfortunately, the business landscape has not endorsed it that way. So a lot of people look at business, look at entrepreneurship the same way as being modest, and you don't want to really, but they're not playing to win. So you either have to encourage playing to win to get to those leagues, or you're always going to be in the C League and the D League or never even make it to that level.
That kind of goes to one of the questions that we were talking about beforehand. Do you want to talk about different types of startup businesses? The difference between single office, home office, some sort of small business, and what a true entrepreneur actually is?
Absolutely. I think, this ties into the resilience piece too. Entrepreneurship is also a game where you got to get good at getting rejected. I still don't like the feeling of getting rejected, but I know it's part of the process. So if I'm operating as a founder in my company, I know I have to get rejected thousands of times to reach that level. If you compare it back to the sports analogy, to get to that level, I have to go through that many no's to find the yeses.
And hopefully lots of learning in between.
Absolutely.
Including how you approach.
For sure.
Yeah.
And so another analogy I like to use is comparison, the parallel worlds of, media and, let's say, entrepreneurship, business entrepreneurship. Artists are startups. Labels are VCs. So, and then I've had countless arguments, discussions with artists in my past world where they complain that the labels are out to get me, and there's so many people talking, people that haven't actually lived it. They've never been in the industry. They create podcasts and they talk about it, and then there's this stigma, and people are just like, oh, the big labels are bad. And to your point earlier, they're not bad. It's just you got to understand the nature of their business. They're investors, and they're not a charitable organization. And if they invest in an artist or an act, they expect returns. And for every dollar, you want to see $5 or $10 back. Otherwise, it's a bad investment. So when looking at entrepreneurship, same way as a founder running your own startup, I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about this.
Please.
Because you hit a nerve that is, again, one of those areas a lot of people have different opinions. I can't tell you how many times I have this conversation with founders who just think investors are out to get a piece of their project. And I have to switch gears and talk from an investor lens with them and say, hey, look, first of all, investors don't have time to, single you out and then take a piece of your company. Yes, there's always predatory behavior across every sector. But generally speaking, you have to understand what the role of the investor is, what's expected of them, understand your role as a founder. And this is part
and back to what you're saying in terms of sports, understanding the rules of the game.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because even LeBron James, in all his glory, he has many coaches, assistant coaches, general managers, people that he has to be held accountable, and he shows up every day to discuss with them. He can't just do whatever he wants. He can't just ignore the rules of MBA if he wants to play in that league. So same for founders. If you want to play at that level, if you want to raise capital, grow your business, scale it, and have multiple investors supporting you with their capital, their resources, you have to understand that you have to perform. So it's back to the founder. It's the founder's responsibility to communicate with their team, with their staff, with their partners, board, and investors alike. But a lot of times people get into entrepreneurship thinking it's a way out because they don't want to be responsible.
I don't want a boss.
Exactly. And I think that's the wrong reason for entrepreneurship. If you don't want to report to anybody or talk to anybody, at best you can have a small business, but then small business and startups are very different.
Very, very different. Yeah. The academic definition of entrepreneurship that I love is creating a new product for a new market. Yeah. While single office, home office, or small businesses are at best, they're going to be a new product or a new market, but rarely both. And in most cases, they're just doing something and they're trying to add some value to it. And then there's the scalability issue. It's a totally different game. And that kind of, the reason I asked you the question earlier on was when you're talking about playing soccer. You know, there's sometimes you need to be a midfielder. Sometimes you need to be in a different position. Maybe you're a better coach. Maybe you're a better team manager. Maybe you're a different, but it's knowing where your strengths are, knowing what you really care about, knowing what your value system is. If you're not in it to make a lot of money, if you're not willing to scale, don't attempt to go talk to VCs or some angel investors, but most of them not. And just sort of to take off on one of the points that you're talking about, where a lot of people are thinking that entrepreneurship is the escape hatch. What I think a lot of people don't have the discipline to do is to profile people and to really understand, who am I? What do I offer? What's the unique value that I create? What's the unique value that my company creates? And who am I best suited to, whether it's the customer, whether it's an investor, whether it's a supplier? We always have to make sure that we're connecting with the right people in the right way. Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, I would love to maybe break down how I've learned the difference between the small business and entrepreneurship startups. So startups, the definition of a startup is finding a repeatable, scalable business model. Yeah. And you can Google it, and there's lots of stuff about that. Yeah. Small businesses, on the other hand, typically they're not in it for fast growth. So you look at the characteristics of the founder of a small business and a startup. Small business founder, their why is, they want to have a business that's sustainable,
income stream,
and absolutely, and maybe their exit strategy is to pass it on to a family member, their children maybe, or keep it for as long as they want, and maybe somebody else might buy it at some point. Startup founders, they have to find a scalable, repeatable business model. So until they do, it's a startup, and then it becomes a different machine. But their exit strategy is to either get acquired, they exit through a initial public offering, or through a merger acquisition. So there's a lot of companies that exit that way, but they need to demonstrate growth and show the scalability. So a good example for anybody listening is, if I open a salon or a restaurant, year one I make $80,000. Year two I make $100,000. Year three I might make $95,000. It's about an $80,000 to $100,000 business year over year. The startup, on the other hand, maybe month one, $0. Month two, $20 subscription sold. Month three, $40. Month four, $60 or $80. So now you're seeing a rate of growth like 50 to 100% month over month. That signals something to investors. And they don't want to see like 1,000 users download an app day one, because they know that's not sustainable. Most likely you paid and bought it from Google and Facebook, and you can't sustain it. And then a savvy investor would dig in and say, okay, well, how many of those users are coming back? How many of them are using it every day? And then founders, they don't have the information to disclose. So
I would say they like the perceptions of the startup and small business, in my personal opinion, it's the equity in the game. I think startups, they build something around equity to be strong. I'm not going to say like the small business, they don't, but it's just different. And that does, I don't think doesn't mean that small business cannot dream big. Even for the salon.
That's definitely not what we're saying, because
example,
there are a lot of examples. There is an example for anybody who's interested. They can look it up. Mrs. B, who had a furniture shop back in the 80s. Warren Buffett acquired it. And now it's like probably one of the largest Nebraska furniture store in the US, one of the largest, like 9 football fields. So you can absolutely grow a small business. But when you look back, actually, Mrs. B, fascinating story, because she couldn't read or write English and started her business, saving up a little bit of money, and true entrepreneur all the way throughout her life. And everybody loved her. And when Warren Buffett went to do a deal with her, it was a handshake deal. Literally a handshake deal, simple signature. So how many founders today would have the guts to do business like that? Because they're always thinking somebody's going to screw me, and they get protective. And even if there's an opportunity for them on the table, the fear kicks in and it gets delayed. And then by the time they decide whether or not they want to do it, the window of opportunities passed. So there's a lot of ways we can analyze it. And startups, there are a ton of startups. The pie has to get bigger. You need to get more investors in. That's the strategy for growing a startup. So you have to think about it at every stage. So if I just get started today with that same business idea I was using as an example, with $20 growing it, I have to think about my first round of capital that I want to raise, from a pre-seed to now my seed round or first round of fundraising. That pie has to grow. I have to willingly be okay with giving percentage of this startup to another entity or multiple people to come in, and that money that they inject increases the longevity of the runway, as we call it, the runway of the startup. So now I have another year and a half to keep growing, and I have to deploy that money and grow and hire people. And again, I have to think about how will those investors get their money back.
May I challenge you on something?
Sure.
Not challenge you in terms of you're wrong, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. What I'm hearing is that emphasis of, focusing on investors. And absolutely, I think startups need to consider getting investment, because you can't scale. There's some companies you simply can't scale. One of the things I'm hearing a lot about in the VC sector, or in the startup sector, mostly in the US, is they're talking about slow scaling and scaling without investors. And the reason is, I don't want to slander anybody, but there's a lot of bad experiences that people had with different types of investors. And there's sort of this belief that bootstrapping at every stage needs to be emphasized a lot more than emphasizing getting investment, because companies end up making really bad decisions. We have many, many stories about Silicon Valley companies that had huge financing rounds, and then they were under pressure to blow that money, to spend that money, to prove that they're actually doing things, hiring huge staff and trying to develop. But they ended up sort of destroying their companies or destroying value because they were too focused on fast growth.
For sure. This is a controversial topic. We can look at it. I like to have a healthy approach to it. There's always those examples of, mismanagement and bad actors everywhere. So that's not the starting point. The starting point should always be the problem that you're looking to solve as a startup.
Yeah.
For the startups, it's really, really important to tap into a real problem. And 90% of the startups, probably even the ones that got funding in the past, they weren't solving a real problem. Most likely it was a fabricated problem. And
there's definitely a lot of hype.
Another easy way for the listeners to understand it is, if I have headache, I'm gonna look for a painkiller to help me get rid of that pain. I'm not gonna look for a vitamin, multivitamin, or something supplemental, right? And a lot of startups, their solutions, they build solutions and they look for a problem. And that is not the right recipe for the kind of startup that will have longevity. So.
And you kind of answered the questions before we wrap up, what's the biggest mistake startups found and made? So you just
there are a lot of, I can share a few lists of mistakes that are common. back to this whole idea of investors, because I want to make sure we dive into it a little bit before we answer this question. When you look at the relationship of founders, investors, from day one, if you know you're building a startup that requires you to grow, your approach to investment is not defensive. So that's what I wanted to explain with that example. If you're a small business owner, and I've had many clients like this, they have the mentality of a small business owner, and they think they're going to build the next Uber or Airbnb. And I have to sit them down and explain which is which, because then they'll be delusional. And
completely different. It's completely different strategies. Yeah.
So it's like two different sports. And
Yeah.
if you're playing this sport, you have to be okay with investors entering at every round.
Yeah.
It's not the end of all, and it's not your only focus.
Yeah.
But if you're a small business owner, you're comfortable with not having investors come in, absolutely grow it at your rate. Make sure you have a good business that adds value. So definitely we can agree on that.
Beautiful. So unfortunately, we already have to wrap up this talk. And but Zavosh, thanks so much. I make some notes here, and I love when you say about LeBron, and like to try to wrap up everything like that I got from this episode. Having your why well defined with your purpose, that can help you with the resilience to open a business and start this game, right? And like LeBron, he's one of the MVPs in the world, a lot of awards, but he has a team that he has to play with. And he's part of the team. And there's a manager, there's the coach, there's everyone. And I love the way that you explain a little bit about the game and how sometimes people has the bad luck to investors, but sometimes they have the same problem inside of the team, not outside of the company.
Right. That's right.
But sometimes inside of the team, they have the same problems, but they can't see that because they already have this illusion that always someone from outside this bad luck. So this is something that people has to open their eyes to see. Sometimes people from outside, they want to help, not just put the fingers like in the business.
That's right. That's right.
And again, thank you so much, Catarina. If you want to give the final insights.
Do you want to wrap?
I just wanted to answer your earlier question, so it's not left.
Don't worry.
In terms of startup mistakes, you already talked about it. Your nucleus, your founding team, you got to be on the same page. You got to value each other. You have to be okay with having people with completely different views than you tell you what their expertise are and what their view is, and you share yours, and then you move towards whichever direction fits your goals. But in terms of mistakes, a lot of times founders look for other people that are similar to them. So you have either a team that are all technical, and when you bring a marketing expert, it's a different language. So immediately they reject, and they don't understand that language, and they don't like it. It makes them uncomfortable. Same as if you have a bunch of marketers and then they hire someone who's technical, and they're gonna struggle. So I would encourage people to be open. If you get like 50% your way, 50% their way, then you get closer to solving the problems for the customers at the end of the day. And then the other mistake, like I said, I would emphasize it again. If somebody wants the role of CEO in a startup, they need to understand they're responsible. They're driving the car, and they can't look for other people to blame. And I could tell you a simple, magical tip for anybody who's interested to succeed in this world: learn how to follow up. Communication. I think 0.1% of founders that I've seen really good at what they do, they know it's their duty to communicate to their team, to their board. But a lot of times other founders, they think everybody else have to report to them. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Kate?
Yeah. So to summarize, sort of take off on your summary, what you added and the points that you made. Start with a purpose. Know what game you're playing. Develop a strategy for the game that you're playing. Develop the skills that you don't have, or bring in the skill sets that you don't have, and learn how to work together. Diversity is key in that. Diversity of thinking, diversity of approaching. and absolutely be curious. And that was something that you didn't actually use the word curious, but you kept, getting back to that point. Be curious. What can you learn? How can you try things differently? How can you understand things differently? And make sure that you really understand the people that you're working with in whatever role, whether it's people inside your company. You have to start with understanding who your customers are and what they want. Understand what investors want. Find the right partners to get as investors.
Absolutely. And just to add a little color, have fun. Have fun doing what you do. So many
true.
times I see people
forget that.
pitching.
Yeah.
There's founders pitching and they're just
Serious.
like falling asleep. It's like, you're probably not the right person to do this.
Yeah.
So have fun. And also, it's okay to fail. Like, your first startup may not be the startup that's going to bring it home.
As long as you're learning. As long as you keep learning.
Beautiful.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you again, Catarina, for being here. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe in all your social medias and just wait for our next episode. Thank you very much.